Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Well, it happened. Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump met for their first much-anticipated handshake. Was it worth the wait? And what happens now? Cross-talking the importance of a handshake, I'm joined by my guest here in Moscow, Mark Sloboda. He's an international affairs and security analyst. We also have Alex Christophora. He is the director and writer for theduran.com. And we have Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst with Sputnik International. All right, gentlemen, as always, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. The big news over the last few news cycles obviously is the meeting of Vladimir Putin with Donald Trump here. But let's talk a little bit what happened right before we talk about it. Dima, we had the Warsaw speech, which I think the lamestream liberal media completely misunderstood. Donald Trump was talking about values, he was talking about civilizations, and of course he took a few snipes at Russia, which I think was perfectly acceptable, and I think that was one of the strategic reasons why he went to Warsaw first. Again, he's answering to his critics in a way. But I thought the speech was very interesting because whose values was he talking about, and what does the West mean, according to Donald Trump?
I was expecting to get disappointed, because the last country where you go if you want to improve relations with Russia is Poland. Yeah? So the plan of Trump's detractors was clear. And he made a few phrases, he pronounced a few phrases that would have infuriated, for example, the Soviet leadership. But Russia is so patient now that his talk about, Soviets and Nazis enslaving Poland, putting a sign of equality between the Nazis and the communists, it went not so much noticed here. What was really astounding was his phrase that the world has never known a better community than our community of nations. And he was not speaking about the present community, about the EU and the United States. He was talking about Christianity. Right. So it was an inner rebellion, because the West now is not under Christian or nationalist dictatorship. It is under an ultra-liberal, globalist dictatorship.
And what are you speaking to, Alex, which I think was interesting, is that if you look at public opinion polls recently taken in Europe, talking about the key issues of terrorism, of trade, of immigration, they're a lot closer to a lot of things that Donald Trump says. They may not like him as an individual, yes, but I think that speech was also a snub to Brussels and this postmodernist ideology that Dima Babich every week talks about on this program. Go ahead.
If you ask the people of Europe, what do they prefer as far as immigration and all these policies that, without mentioning Trump, you'll see that the people of Europe are actually very well aligned with Trump's policies and what he campaigned for to win the presidency. So there's really not that much disconnect between Trump and the population of Europe, especially Eastern Europe, especially if you're looking at Poland, Hungary, and these countries, which have a very well-aligned view of the world that Trump has. But I think you had two narratives that were going on in the U.S. mainstream media with the speech in Warsaw. The one narrative, usually expressed by Fox, was that it was very Reagan-esque.
Yes.
So that was what they were playing on. The other channels, MSNBC and the likes, were saying that he turned his back on Obama's neoliberal, traditional, neoliberal values and things like this.
Rejecting even American exceptionalism.
He rejected the 8 years of Obama exceptionalism and neoliberal values, and they were furious that he did that. So those were the two channels
Alex,
that were taking place.
They would be furious, but whatever he has to say. Mark, your takeaway from that speech.
Yeah, I think it was an extremely powerful, right-wing, nationalist, conservative speech that completely infuriated the few liberals who bothered to read it and could understand it. The key words that set them off were tradition, which nothing drives a liberal/neoliberal crazier than referring to tradition, and he referred to God. And he said specifically, he said specifically that the people of Europe and Western civilization as a whole, in other words, they don't like civilization or civilizations, want God. And you don't have to agree with this speech. I don't agree with large pieces of this speech to realize that it was a well-crafted speech that actually articulated not only a foreign policy, but a worldview. And it is probably the best speech that Trump ever gave. I'm almost sure that he wrote very little of it.
I think Steve Bannon probably had a big hand in it.
But it did two things. It was directly intended as a slight against Brussels and to show that, again, this new Europe, old Europe divide that Rumsfeld once created during the Iraq War. And it was sure to piss off Brussels and Berlin, which have been even talking about sanctioning Poland and bringing all types of lawsuits against them for not accepting the immigrants. It was a speech against globalization. You never heard that word mentioned except in the negative. And also, I think a bit of it was to provide the neocons and the Democrats in the U.S. with some bones, throw some bones to get them off his back so that when he went to the G20 meeting in Hamburg, he could sit down with Putin, having provided enough anti-Soviet rhetoric in Poland.
But at the same time, Dima, what I think is remarkable, Mark's absolutely right here, and then you could tell there were just, chunks of that speech that were just red meat to throw to the neocons and his critics at home. But a lot of the ideas that he expressed are ideas that Vladimir Putin expresses all of the time now.
It's true.
The family, God, religion, tradition, culture. I mean, it's extraordinary. And there were a couple of people that picked up on it and really criticized him for echoing some ideas that Vladimir Putin might be saying.
The point is that when people say Russia doesn't have an ideology, Russia has an ideology now, but it is very flexible. We are ready to hear Reagan's speeches without getting infuriated, And we are ready to doubt, we are ready to ask. So when Trump in his speech said, we debate everything, we challenge everything, I think this is against the current rigid ideology of the Western world. Remember what Comey said about RT? They sold out about this amazing country of ours. Our slogan, question more. Why is it so irritating in the EU, in the United States? They question, they debate. These people have stopped debating long ago. Let's
keep with the word debate here. So, Alex, if there's anytime Donald Trump is brought up, and particularly Vladimir Putin, how did it play out in Hamburg for you? Because it looks like, if you listen to MSNBC and CNN, he's sold out to Vladimir Putin. I don't see it that way. I thought it was a meeting of minds.
The way they're playing it out is, he sold out to Vladimir Putin. Putin got everything he wanted. Russia got everything it wanted from the meeting. And Trump basically went in there once again as a stooge of the Kremlin, but a naive stooge, a bad negotiating stooge. So pretty much the narrative going around right now in the liberal left media is that Trump went in, Putin knew everything that was going on, he had him read from the minute they shook hands, and he got everything he wanted, and the U.S. left, to really bad position.
But it seems to me that's very interesting, Mark, is that I don't think either side expected very much at all, and I think that's what makes it kind of a success. Yeah. The Russians didn't ask for much, and Donald Trump didn't give very much, or they didn't agree on very much. I think it was still the best takeaway you can take from it, at least from the way. There's a crack in the door now, possibly, for some other negotiations. I think that's
there's a cooperation. There's a cooperation that was set.
First of all, let me say I disagree completely. Russia does not have an ideology, and that is part of the problem. It has a worldview, it has a culture, and it has a divided conception of its own civilization, but it does not have an ideology. This meeting was supposed to last. It's a meeting arranged on the sidelines of the G20 meeting. It was they tried to put all kinds of constraints on Trump. They wanted a neocon, Fiona Hill, to hold his leash in the room. He wouldn't have any of that. They wanted it just a short drop-in. He wanted a full bilateral meeting. He got what he wanted. It was him and Putin, Tillerson and Lavrov and 2 translators, and that's it. It was supposed to last 35 minutes. It lasted 2 hours and 20 minutes. At one point, the American delegation tried to send Trump's wife into the room to end the conversation. That didn't work either. All right. This is exactly what the liberals, what the Democrats, what the neocons have long feared. The two men have a rapport. They have like worldviews, and it's very problematic.
I think it's really interesting, Dima, is that Trump knew he was going to get a lot of flack for it, but he doesn't care anymore. He doesn't care anymore. Well, he knows he's going to get this kind of commentary from the liberal media. He simply doesn't care anymore.
I wish I could be so optimistic. I think that I didn't expect anything from this meeting because
me too.
Trump was in a bind, and it was clear that he couldn't even give back this diplomatic property back to Russia simply because the mainstream media would say, "What did you demand in return?"
This was a sanction that in the last days of the
Obama administration. When Obama just tried to ruin our relationship before leaving office.
They seized Russian diplomatic
absolutely,
properties
and they're not giving it back, you know. So the problem is that right after the meeting ended, the same story continued in the mainstream media. Now they are targeting Jared Kushner for meeting a Russian lawyer, a woman lawyer, in June 2016. I read it in the New York Times. He met a foreign agent. Well, for God's sake, for 3 years, for 5 years, the Western media has been blasting Russia for introducing this definition, a foreign agent, in our conversation. And now, whom do they call a foreign agent? A woman lawyer from Russia who came to talk to Jared Kushner about adoptions of Russian kids by American families. That is a foreign agent.
You know, I guess we just have to accept this parallel universe, because I came across that story, Dima. You know, I just ignore it now.
Smoke.
Because if there had been something, and I'm going to quote that producer that Veritas secretly taped, is that if there were something, it would have been leaked by now, okay? This is just hot air. They're chasing their tail.
I think the most significant part of the G20 meeting was that Trump created his own reality. And what I mean by that, I think for the first time in a G20, in a lot of years, it used to be Obama coming to one of these meetings, hanging out with Merkel, hanging out with
the Chinese.
Yeah, there were like a bunch of, they were like a little clique of like mean girls, you know, making fun of everybody else, you know, spitting out how great their value is and how everyone else is.
It's almost like a reunion.
Yeah, it was like a high school
reunion of mean girls.
Yeah, those were the cool
learned that phrase this
exactly. But in came Trump. Everyone wanted to meet him. Everyone wanted to stand next to him. There was no U.S. and Germany. There was no Trump and Merkel.
Particularly the French president, which was just
he was running to the
All right, gentlemen, I got to
front
jump in. We have a hard break. After our short break, we'll continue our discussion on the recent G20 summit. Stay with RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing the recent G20 summit. Okay, Mark, let me go back to you. You know, last week I learned this phrase, mean girl, okay? And so it was already injected in our discussion here. And mean girl to Angela Merkel, go.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure that Angela Merkel qualifies as any type of girl, this old elderly German matron. Anyway, she has been proclaimed by the Western media and most of its politicians as the leader of the free world. And she was on full display at this G20 summit. They were talking about it as some kind of chance for her to put forward her position as the defender of globalization and the liberal world order. And she fell flat. This is some of the quotes that we have coming out of Angela Merkel from this. I have to take things as they are. Talking about the protesters and the riots, often two different things, that disrupted the entire events from the outside, the police did their best. And talking about the results, summarizing the summit, a very sober assessment, the summit took place from her perspective. What the summit really showed is that it showed her own limitations, her inability to lead the West. As she was leading her signature session on climate change, Putin and Trump, the leader of the United States, were meeting for 2 hours and 20 minutes on the sidelines. So her entire invective fell flat. And on top of that, what I think the actual results of this summit, as far as her shows, is maybe perhaps in their best interest. Both the UK and the EU's reaction to this summit and the negative response to Trump at this summit shows that because of Trump, the EU's emancipation from the status of a U.S. client state may finally be at hand.
And that wouldn't be a bad thing. No. Go ahead.
You know, when Russians expected that relations between the United States and Russia would improve under Trump, I think a lot of Russians simply did not understand that the West now is not a democracy, it's a dictatorship, but it's not a dictatorship of persons. It's a dictatorship of an ideology. And Merkel just represents that ideology. And her phrases, which are absolutely empty, they reveal the emptiness of that ideology. But also, I'm interested in the way, how did Trump's detractors, how did they view the ideal conversation that he would have with Putin about the Russian influence over elections? Would Trump say something like, why did you make me the president of the United States? Next time, don't do it, okay? Or stop telling me that I won. So it's just absurd, you know, the very very idea that he should be tough on Putin about his own victory at the election, right?
Real quick, can we just say that it was all about Trump and Putin in that meeting?
Absolutely.
It was a G20 in Germany,
Absolutely.
and no one talked about it.
They were just background noise.
Absolutely.
No one talked about it.
Well, you know, I guess that's the end of the so-called meme of isolation. All right, gentlemen, let's switch gears here. Let's talk about Syria. Mark, what does this ceasefire agreement that both of the leaders came to, is this meaningful, or is it just a means to show that they can do something together?
Okay, it is possible that it is meaningful as a chance for the U.S. to save face and withdraw from this, realize that they've lost. Tillerson even said, maybe they have the wrong approach.
Yep.
Or they have the right approach, and we have the wrong approach. That is a tremendous admission from a U.S. Secretary of State to admit that their attempted regime change of another country for 6 years may have been the wrong approach.
But you know, one of the interesting things, Dima, is that on the Russian side, you know, they're thinking, I'm pretty sure they're thinking the following. We've had agreements with the United States when it comes to Syria, and they always fall apart. And of course, from their perspective, it's the U.S. and its allies that are not keeping to their commitments here. So I look at it as being very minimalist. It's almost kind of like a little test. We'll see if we can do this baby step together, because there are strong doubts. Right now, at least right now, there's still a lot of doubts. Who's actually running the show? I mean, is Trump his own man? Because we had Ash Carter, when he was head of the Defense Department, torpedo all the hard work that Kerry had put into a ceasefire. So I think this is a small step to see if there's any credibility.
Well, let me remind our audience that there was a ceasefire in Syria brokered by the United States and Russia, by Kerry and Lavrov, in autumn last year. And it was destroyed by the Pentagon. It was destroyed by Ash Carter. So I can only say that Vladimir Putin is really a patient man, because he didn't raise that issue. He just said, the Trump that I saw was very different from the television Trump. I see the American attitude to Syria is changing. There is only one way how the American attitude to Syria should change. You know, that is allowing Russia, Turkey, and Iran to have their try at
least Russia and Iran,
a peaceful settlement. Well, even Turkey, with Erdogan being very unpredictable, is a more reliable partner on Syrian peace than the United States and the EU. That's just my opinion.
This is the whole.
Not an idea.
This is the whole thing, because it's unclear exactly what the United States wants to achieve in Syria, and this is one of the difficult things in dealing with the United States there. What is its strategic aim? It's unclear. It changes from time to time. Go ahead.
I think you're exactly right. I think what we should be watching is who's going to call the shots in Syria. I think Trump definitely wants to defeat ISIS. I really believe. I think he wants to check off that election promise. That I think he wants to do. But we always have the deep state in the U.S., and they always sabotage any type of deal that comes about between the U.S. and Russia and trying to bring peace to Syria. So it's going to be interesting to see how the deep state sabotages this agreement, and what Trump's reaction
exactly if he can somehow make sure it doesn't happen.
I would love to see the tweet. I would love to see the tweet: brokered a ceasefire in Syria, but deep state torpedoed.
No, but it's really that, you know, we're given this binary, is that, you know, can the Americans and the Russians actually work something out? It's really, can Trump lead the American side in dealing with foreign policy? And this could be a very interesting litmus test 6 months in.
Yeah, not just the American side, though. That's part of the problem. Yeah, I agree. They're going to, the deep state, the Dems, the neocons, they're not only going to try to sink the ceasefire, deep six the ceasefire, but the whole Trump-Putin detente, they're going to try and sink that from the beginning. They're furious because of this. They're going to go on the warpath now. But this ceasefire, right, we've seen these ceasefires come and go, and it's got the exact same problems. It's vague. It's undefined. It's in a very limited section of Syria, the southwest, that has not been a hotbed until the last few months, in which it was resuscitated in an attempt to try to get the Syrian government to stop their advance in the east against ISIS. This is of particular concern to Jordan, who was part of this, and Israel, who very loudly, even before the deal was announced, and this had to be arranged before the summit. It wasn't arranged during the summit. It was just agreed to at the summit. Israel is very unhappy at the prospect of Russian troops and Russian planes at the ceasefire zone. But the U.S., Trump is basically guaranteeing for the fighters in this area, which are HTS, also known as literally Al-Qaeda, the Salafist jihadis, Ahrar al-Sham, Jaish al-Islam, and a few token Free Syrian Army units that are there as to provide conduits, providing arms to the much larger jihadist forces. And also Israel. Can Trump not only speak for his own deep state, but Al-Qaeda, Ahrar al-Sham, and Jaish al-Islam and Israel?
If he does, it shows who's allied with whom here. Let's switch gears before we run out of time, guys. North Korea. That was a big part of the summit as well, what to do with North Korea. It seems to me there really needs to be some new thinking. And we talked about it last week, Dima, is that what does North Korea want? Almost no one ever asks that question. Well, they want security guarantees. Their nuclear program is a deterrent to avoid being attacked from the outside. How many? 23,000 troops, 24,000 troops, American troops are in South Korea? The Korean War ended a long time ago, or the armistice came into effect a long time ago. Wow. Where do we go from here? Because there are only bad options if you listen to the mainstream media.
I think before North Koreans get security guarantees, at least they need to be talked to, you know. And this is something that Russia and China want. You know, the Chinese spokesman, the spokesman for the Ministry of Defense of China, said today that actually we terminated all the military contacts with the North Korean regime, but we urge the United States to talk to them, you know, to have a dialogue.
Alex, what about this freeze for freeze? Okay, freeze the program, freeze the exercise. Is that seems like a reasonable first step?
Supported by both Russia and China.
Yes, it's supported by those parties. But I think one of the most interesting narratives is that a couple months ago we saw Trump and China, U.S. and China, kind of working. It was presented that they would work together to tackle North Korea. And I think what you're seeing now is how they misjudged Chinese foreign policy when it comes to dealing with North Korea, and now they're starting to walk.
But why should China be doing Trump's bidding?
Exactly. That's what they were waiting for, and that's what they were expressing to the whole world, is that China is going to do our bidding, and they're going to work with us to bring North Korea to a heel. And they misunderstood exactly how China's foreign policy works. And now I think they're just trying to recalculate everything that's going on in North Korea.
But that shows how myopic the foreign policy swamp in Washington is, that they can just snap their fingers and tell other countries what to do, particularly a powerhouse like China.
North Korea is a very unreasonable regime that has very reasonable security and basic political recognition demands. I mean, they're an economy that is 1/40th the size of South Korea's. And they have only half the population, but the U.S. has tens of thousands of troops on their border and continues to escalate the situation. It must be said, something that the South Korean President Moon right now is not very happy about. The U.S. just flew B-1 nuclear bombers right along the South Korean side of the North Korean bomber and dropped dud bombs, right? This is an escalation.
But this kind of attitude, this is what keeps the North Korean regime in power. That's the reason to exist.
North Korea is not afraid of a U.S. strike because they've got enough artillery. If the U.S. attacks them,
they will incinerate.
To incinerate Seoul. And South Korea is very afraid of the U.S. escalating the situation like this.
20 seconds, Steve.
Well, I think that we have the same problem in North Korea as, for example, in Ukraine, and that is the inability of the United States and their client regimes to talk to their opponents.
Well, we didn't have time. We didn't have time on this program, but it looks like there's going to be a direct connection between Moscow and Washington to deal with Ukraine. You know, gentlemen, it's about time. And to echo Mark, it shows that Merkel is the loser in that. We've run out of time, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests here in Moscow, and thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules. Good program, guys.